Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I'm your host, Mike Campbell. Today I'm very excited, privileged, honored to bring you one of my guests. Guest who's been on the show before, a good friend of mine, Mr. Connor Beaton. And Connor is just now releasing here in Australia. It was released a little while ago, a few weeks, hard to say exactly at the time of recording, his brand new book, Men's Work. And I'm so excited for this book. I know Connor very well. I know his work very well. And this book, Men's Work, I think is something, to quote Connor, and something we talk about in the episode, that whilst there's numbers and all those things and where it gets to on lists are nice, for him, the ultimate goal is that this book becomes the resource for men, definitely, but for coaches, for therapists, to give to the men in their lives to start the journey inwards on themselves and in this work. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a little bit of the excerpt from this book, and then that will give you an insight into what we talk about in this episode. Because we talk about everything. We talk about the book, yes. We talk about Connor's process, the insecurities, the self-doubt, all the stuff that came up for him in the process of that, the kickback that he heard from publishing houses when they were pitching it, and the consistent message that kept coming, which was one of total bullshit. And I love the line that Connor said to the last person that rejected it. It's beautiful. We'll talk about that in the show. And we talk about this stuff here. So I'm going to read a little bit of the blurb from the back. Suck it up, stuff it down, pour a bottle of whiskey over the top, rinse and repeat until sufficiently numbed. This is the step-by-step doctrine men are taught. Men have traded in their internal leadership, sovereignty, and even masculinity for comfort, validation, and an escape from the mundane boardroom of their existence. Where is the modern-day strength training for the hearts and minds of men? In Men's Work, ManTalks founder Connor Beaton offers the tactical, self-led guide men have been looking for. Here, he destigmatizes inner work by reframing it as a kind of psychological warrior training that many men can relate to and have been craving. Connor walks you through a framework for facing the hidden and rejected aspects of yourself, factors that lead to self-sabotage, anxiety, and depression, through real-life stories from men he's worked with, and guidance and practical, accessible exercises. He takes you on a 3-part journey to uncover and free yourself from the thoughts, emotions, and patterns that hold you back. And there's a little bit more there, but we'll leave that there. And as Connor says, the goal of this work is not only to become a better man, but a better participant in the collective enterprise of living. True freedom awaits. So that's this episode. We dive into, we're not just talking about the book, although there'll be references here and there, as I alluded to before. There's some of those pieces that we discuss. And we also talk about a little piece around kind of women and how we've created this idea that it's kind of the world is anti-men. And if you're a man feeling perhaps disconnected, disenfranchised, unsure, this conversation is for you. Certainly Connor's book is for you. So as a reminder, remember, share this podcast with men that you think will benefit from it. If you're a fan of Connor's work and you're being introduced to me for the first time, hi, I'm Mike. Come and say hi. Check out the rest of my work. As always, like, subscribe, give me a rating. You know those things are powerful. Please take 2 minutes. Jump over to Spotify, give a rating. Jump over to iTunes, give me a rating and a review. And then enjoy this episode. Connor, welcome back to the show, brother. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me again.
Now, there's context is what I was going to say to the conversation. I'm very privileged to be friends with you, and I've spent a lot of time with you over the last little while, both in person, but also online. And then the other piece of context is that you, my man, are a new author. And spoiler alert for those listening in Australia, it's come out already as we record this in North America, but it's going to be coming out when we release this in Australia. So first of all, brother, well done. Fucking huge effort on that.
Thank you.
How is it being an author, a published author?
I think it's still sinking in, to my body, to my mind. Honestly, I was saying this the other day to someone, I may have said to you guys in our men's group, but it's an accomplishment that I didn't realize would have as much meaning as it does. When you put your thoughts, your life, your teachings into written form, and then set them free out into the world, it's kind of like giving birth to something,
Mm,
and you
mm,
just kind of hold on and hope that people enjoy it and like it, and
yeah.
or at the very least aren't too too villainous in their critique. Some people can be. I wrote a book called Men's Work, and so you never know how that's going to go, but so far it's been really good. And I think I found that I really enjoy the writing process, and I think I'm going to do a lot more of it, because the the response so far from people has been so good,
Mm,
and just and from people that I didn't know were going to enjoy the book, and then from some other people, like the founder of the publishing house that I went through, Sounds True, who's published Wim Hof and
mm.
Eckhart Tolle and stuff like that. She interviewed me, and she had nothing but praise, and she was like, "You're a very gifted writer." And I was like, "Oh," she said, "I don't say that to everybody, because I've published, my company's published thousands of books,
Yeah, yeah.
tens of thousands of books." And so I really took that to heart. So it's been great. It's a lot. um yeah, it's a lot. You really have to kind of like check your expectations of how it's going to go, and yeah, it's fun.
How is that going? The almost juxtaposition for like I'm committed to creating this thing and putting it out into the world, birthing it, as you said, which I totally get. And but it's hard not to focus on like the numbers and the sales and all that other kind of more businessy side of it. How are you
you know
navigating
i
that?
I like focusing on the numbers sometimes. And I had some goals for myself based on some research. I think it's something
Hmm.
like 95 or 98% of books that are written will never sell more than 10,000 copies. And that to me was pretty wild. And so my mission was to
Mm,
sell more than 10,000 copies the first year, and to get into that sort of like top 2 percentile. And that was sort of like my data driven part. I really like, I
hmm,
grew up reading the newspaper every morning, and looking at the stats of like NFL players
mm.
and NHL players and stuff like that. So I've always been a little data driven.
Yeah.
But my main mission was to have the book be like the number one resource that all coaches, all therapists, all psychologists recommend for men, and for the people that are trying to understand them.
Mm,
So it's going well, and I think it really is, um, like tempering the numerical expectations and remaining tightly tethered to the vision.
mm,
And I think for me, it's like, this is a long run play. I don't expect my book to kind of like hit for a while. I think it'll
mm,
probably take months, maybe even years, before it really becomes something that is gaining momentum. And I'm okay with that. Whereas I think my wife will probably hit the New York Times bestselling list week number one,
oh yeah, so
because
there's the
she's got a book
context.
coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, I've had to humility and being humbled by our partner sometimes is a beautiful gift.
Yeah. Yeah, an interesting dynamic in the household, I'm sure. So through the process now, as you've said, like it can be challenging to kind of sit in that spot and like, how's it going to go putting me into the world?
Hmm.
And then through the process of writing, how did you find perhaps your relationship with yourself in that? And perhaps more so, like, did you find that there was, the voice of doubt
Hmm.
and, kind of questioning like you and your knowledge and what you are going to put out into the world?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I'd be lying if I didn't have moments of like deep insecurities. And I mean, I failed grade 12 English. I failed grade 12 English. I had to go back and redo grade 12 English because I fucking failed. I like didn't go to class. I was more interested in my girlfriend at the time, and drinking and driving my Mustang. Like, I didn't give a shit. And it's not that I wasn't good academically. I just didn't care,
Yeah.
and I didn't really have any reason to care. um
Mm,
and that's a bit of a different story. But I think there was this, when I started writing the book. I remember I had calls. I got an agent in New York here, like one of the top agencies, and they helped me put together the proposal, get the book sold. I signed a book deal,
Mm.
and and then I should just say my interview with two of the biggest publishing houses was on the day that I came home from the hospital after my son had been born, which was nuts. I was like, I had no sleep. There was this new entity in my house.
Oh,
We had
I
just been in the
totally knew.
hospital for like
Yeah, wow.
we'd been in the hospital for like 4 or 5 days, and then we get home and I have these calls with these publishing houses, and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, this is
Mm.
crazy, man. But then when I
Were
started the
these
writing
houses that you
process,
went with in the end?
yeah, one of them was, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, uh, yeah. And then when I started the writing process, a lot of those younger insecurities and fears really
Mm.
started to emerge. I think
Mm.
the burden of any kind of artistry, whether it's writing or dance or music or painting or whatever it is that you're bearing a part of yourself in
Mm.
such a way as to openly and directly elicit uh, critique, dislike,
Mm.
anger sometimes, animosity. I mean, you
Mm.
really open the deepest parts of yourself. If you're, I almost said if you're doing it right, but I think that's kind of the only way to do it, right? Is if you're doing it right, you're opening the deepest parts of
Mm.
yourself to
Mm.
the creative process, and then knowing that when it's out in the world, there's a chance that some people are certainly not going to like what you've created, or they won't understand it.
Yeah.
And so some of
And
those
make themselves
insecurities,
heard.
yeah, yeah, and some of those insecurities came up when I started writing the book. I was 3 or 4 weeks in. I remember coming into the kitchen after sitting in my office for probably about 8 hours and writing like 200 words, and coming out and just being like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't know if people are going to like this. I don't know if what I'm writing is making sense. And I was just so in my head.
Mm.
And I'm going to out my wife here. She was like, you're fine. You need to get over it. Like, you're being dramatic. Did not have room and space for it. Because here she is, she's like taking care of our newborn son. And I'm like having a
Yeah.
existential, sort of moment about whether or not what I'm writing is going to be any good or not.
Was that what you
She
needed to
had
hear in that moment?
No, definitely not. I
And
told her that. I told her that in the
retrospectively?
moment. I was like, no. In the moment, I was like, that's not what I need to hear. And I actually remember saying, because she was in the process of also getting a book deal, and I was like, you are going to have this
Yeah, you
exact
fucking
moment
wait.
in like 3 or 4 months, and I'm going to be compassionate and loving and kind. But I
You
just want you to
fucking
know,
watch.
I am going to say, I told you so. And I want you to say, I'm sorry and you were right. And she was like, okay. And sure enough, that time came where she walked out of the office and was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, lots of moments like that. Lots of moments like that.
Yeah. Um, he's a human, right? Like, of course, all of that stuff comes up. And I think that's so beautiful that you can sit with that, but still push through to create something so fucking remarkable. Let's just call it what it is, and super proud of you for it. And I love there's that moment there where there's this broader context of like, I'm looking after a newborn. Can you fucking gather your shit together, please?
Right.
And did you
Yeah.
give it the little bit of here's your own medicine, I love you, when her turn came?
You bet. Yeah, you bet. When she came out that one day, and I was like, I told you this moment was going to happen. And she's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. But no, I mean, I was very loving and kind and compassionate. And I think I actually ended up the next day calling our buddy Jeremy Goldberg, who's written a book, and Sylvester McNutt, who's written a book, and just been like, what do you do when you hit this part? Like when your fears and your doubts and your insecurities are coming up in your writing process, like, what do you guys do? And they had some sage advice. So that was helpful.
Beautiful. So then, the book is called Men's Work. And I remember you sharing with us, uh, I mean, I suppose the way I'll word it is, when you were meeting with some publishing houses and it was being pitched, some, yeah, I don't know if kickback is the right word, but perhaps some doubt maybe on like, is this men's work thing even gonna land.
Yeah.
How did you find that? As you know, because as you've just said, even though the book wasn't written at that point, the concept is there. You're already committed to putting yourself into this piece of work and putting it out into the world.
Well, I had a 85-page book proposal,
Mm.
right? Like when you go and pitch Simon and Schuster or Penguin Random House or, any of the big publishing houses in North America that I think are also worldwide. I'm not too sure, but I think they're worldwide. You have to have your book like flushed out. So when I got my agent, it was all dialed in. But I had some conversations before with a few of the major publishing houses and some of the top, senior editors there. And it was like 3 different publishing houses all sort of said the same thing. We love you. We love the book idea. We love your platform and we love your message, but men don't buy self-help books. And so we're going to pass. And, the first time I was like, oh, okay. Like maybe they're just telling me to, shove on because they don't actually like my book. And this is just a nice way of saying it. But then when I kept hearing it, I was like, oh, this is like an industry standard
Yeah.
that they really they just don't produce content for men's self-development. And so it actually lit more of a fire under my ass because it pissed me off. I remember having with the last publishing house, the guy said the same thing to me. And I was like, have you ever considered that maybe it's that you're just publishing stuff that men don't give a shit about? Like, have you ever considered that it's actually that it's not that men don't buy self-help books or personal development books. It's actually that the content and the product that you're producing is garbage, And he's like, well, I don't think that's it. And the data, blah, blah, blah.
You need to read my
I was like,
book, bro.
okay. Yeah. I was like, okay. And so, it really kind of fired me up
Well done.
to do something about it. And that made me become more relentless because then I was like, okay, now I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder. Now I want, not that I want to prove people wrong, but I know through my experience traveling around the world, speaking to men around the world, my podcast has a ton of people that follow it, my Instagram following, all that kind of stuff. I was like, I know that there are hundreds and thousands of men, right? Millions of men that are out there that do this work that are looking for resources that are good. And it would be nice if it was backed by a publishing house. And so yeah, it kind of lit a fire under me to actually just get out there and do it. And so far, I mean, we're a week in, and I mean, we've sold thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. And so I think, yeah, not that I was right, but
Well, I mean, I would go
that
out
they
on a
were
limb and
wrong.
say you are right too, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be a thirst, and I love that point and that differentiation in that point that you made. Like, so at some point that has to change. Who's going to change it? Like, if publishing houses won't do it, are you going to leave it to people to self-publish and try and break the back of that? It's a pretty big ask. And maybe the content you've been putting out hasn't been directed for men because of your belief about it. And so when's it ever going to land? Yeah, well done on sending that challenge down. So then, either way, you've gone ahead and you've written this wonderful book called Men's Work. So for you, what is men's work?
I mean, I wrote in the very beginning that there's many different forms of men's work, and that I don't claim to own the statement just because I named my book after that. And I had a lot of hesitation calling it men's work because men's work is I would say a very much an emerging genre within the psychological, therapeutic, fitness, self-help, personal development space. And for me, I think there's a couple ways of describing it. One, I think men's work is the psychological training grounds and challenges that we as men are craving in order to lead ourselves more effectively. That's what men's work is, regardless of whether you're talking about Robert Bly and the mythopoetic movement back in the 70s and 80s, whether you're talking about David Data and sexual yoga, whether you're talking about Robert Glover and No More Mr. Nice Guy, whether you're talking about the work that we do. I think that a lot of it leads back to, I, as a man, want to lead myself effectively, in my sex life, in my decisions, in my choices at work, with my woman, with my family, with my culture. I want to respect myself, and I want to respect the decisions that I make, and I want to feel in alignment and in integrity. And so men's work is really the process of helping us as men move through the obstacles that are naturally there, whether it's childhood abuse or trauma or abandonment issues, or the pain that we've experienced from divorces and separations, or whatever it is that has sort of stifled our capacity to lead ourselves effectively. That's really what men's work is, I think, in its essence. And then I will just say, and this is a little bit more esoteric, I think it's about connecting us to the essence of masculinity, the energy of fatherhood that I think is sorely lacking within our culture.
Mm,
And I think it's about reconnecting us to the energetic quality of good men,
mm,
that's really under fire in a lot of ways. And that I think has kind of that fire itself, that energy itself, is really dwindling within our culture, especially in the West.
mm. Yeah, I think we are seeing a lack of that. And isn't it interesting to reflect on all those messages that you heard from those publishing houses? And here we are. I know it's a cliche term, but kind of in the trenches per se, going, well, we're hearing that there's a lack of this stuff, and how do we get it to them? And what I'm hearing in that is, I mean, so much, and I love that. But then there's kind of, I suppose, this idea that of maturity,
Mm-hmm.
and like self-respect was a big part of that as well. And yeah, it's this broad topic. It can look like many different things, and it certainly does.
Well,
And
can I
then,
just say one thing on that
yeah.
before we keep going? Because I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because I think one of the things that I noticed in my journey in getting this book out is that what they were really saying, what these publishing houses were really saying, is we will produce a book by you for men so long as it fits the narrative.
Mm,
And that narrative is oftentimes within our culture right now a very female centric and feminine centric message. And so what those companies were really saying is, we'll print your content so long as it's female oriented.
mm,
And I think that was the biggest problem that I have, because if you look at the majority of men's books that are getting published, and I'm not going to put names out because I don't think it's helpful, but a lot of these books that are getting put out by big publishing houses are super female oriented,
mm,
right? They're talking more to women than are actually talking to men.
mm,
They're talking about men
mm,
to
yeah.
women versus talking to men about men.
Mm,
And that's the frustrating part, is that when you want to write a book that is about men and for men and written to men, publishing houses don't necessarily want to do that because it's risky, right?
mm,
It risks upsetting the sort of modern narrative that exists within Western culture,
mm,
which is in some ways anti-men. It's been hurt by men, and there's been sort of some anger that's been brewing for a long time, which is
mm-hmm,
understandable.
mm,
And so, I think in our culture, from an archetypal standpoint, we're seeing the kind of decline or death of the hero and the rise of the heroine,
mm.
right? And that is very emergent within our culture, and I think that that's showing up within our literature around these topics.
Yeah, and therefore wanting men to want this. You need to
Yes.
want this stuff. Oh, men don't want to buy it. I mean, there's a pretty simple, 1+1 = 2 there. It's because we're not giving them what they want and what they need.
Right.
We're trying to fit them into this little hole. Yeah, I mean, that's glaring. Surely that's glaring them in the face, but they're not willing to see it, right? Yeah, I mean, I agree. And as you were speaking there, the words were coming to mind as well, which was talking about men, or maybe at men, but not necessarily to and with men. And it's
Mm-hmm.
a very different, yeah, undertaking. Because one of them is easy, and the other requires like sitting down and actually wanting to listen and understand and see where men are at and what's going on, and therefore like respecting and honoring, and it's almost this. versus, like the
Mm,
men versus women and vice versa kind of thing, which, yeah, it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like both can win, and it's absolutely
mhm.
needed. And I think that's part of the challenge. And, I certainly see this, and definitely interested to hear your take. Part of the challenge for a lot of men, I've lived this and certainly worked with and spoken to many men, where there's a struggle to feel like your role is important, and that can be broad. I'm one of the many, but then it comes down to the individual and go, well, where is my place? Like, what
Mm.
purpose do I have? What meaning do I? How do I go about, you know, building a life and becoming something that all of a sudden isn't valued or wanted?
Mm.
Find that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a kind of, whether it's spoken or unspoken, message baked into our culture right now that says that men aren't needed, and you hear this all the time in dating, right? Like, I don't need a man. I don't need a man. It's like, well, that's such an interesting, and I get what is being said there, but
Mm.
you know, you can go online and
But I
Google
don't think a
search.
lot of the people saying it truly do.
No, no, I think that they do want a man and need a man in their life in some capacity, but maybe don't understand what that looks like. Because
Mm.
here's the interesting thing, right? Is that what is the core desire for for the masculine or for most men? There's a couple of pretty basic things, right? One is freedom.
Mm.
Two is contribution, right? Because we find a sense of deep meaning in
Mm.
contributing to the people and things around us. Right? If
Mm.
you see any man, I mean, that's how a good portion of the world has been built, is men contributing to things outside of themselves,
Mm.
whether it's communities or infrastructures or political whatever, right?
Mm.
So when you continue to tell men you're not needed, they begin to check out, and we're
Mm.
seeing this in the research, right? It's like in America, the college graduation rates of men are dramatically decreasing, and in the
Mm.
next 2 to 3 years, it's something like for every two women that go to college will be one man, right? And so there'll
Mm.
be a 60-40 split where 60% of the college graduates are women and 40% are men. Well, is that problematic? For some men, it's not, because for some men, they're totally fine, working trades and they love that, or you can start a business, you don't need a degree, all that kind of stuff. But guess what? Guess what women want? Women want college educated men, right? Women who have gone to college report 80% of women that have gone to college and have a college degree say that they will not date, mate, or marry a man without a college degree. So when you have men dropping out of college, dropping out of the workforce, not like, I mean, the rates of men having sex under their 30s
Mm.
has completely, like, it's dismal, right? Something like
Mm.
27% of men under the age of 30 haven't been sexually active in the last 12 months or ever. And that's just another example of, and you might say, well, is that such a big deal? And it's like, well, that's up three times,
Mm.
just in the last decade. And that's not the same for women, right? It's like 12% of women under the age of 30 haven't been sexually active, right? So there's this huge discrepancy where men aren't going to college, men aren't entering into relationships, they're not being sexually active, they're exiting the workforce. And what do we know about civilizations that implode? We know that they have a large amount of men who are checked out of the culture and checked out of society, right? They're disengaged, they don't have relationships, they're completely isolated from culture, they're completely isolated from an education system, they're
Mm.
isolated from the workforce, they're isolated from women and intimacy, and that's dangerous. And
Mm.
so I think that that's a byproduct of many, many, many things, but certainly it's a byproduct of saying you're not needed, and we don't want you because of whatever, right? You're dangerous, or
Mm.
you don't get it, or whatever the case may be. So I know that was a lot. Maybe I'll just pause there after spewing out data and research at you.
I love it. We got to get the data nerd in there from time to time, and but also numbers tell a really important story, and that's why we have them, right? And if we're not paying attention to that, and if we're not learning from history, we're doomed to repeat the same potentially fatal mistakes. So then what do you think we are seeing as a consequence? Or there's many consequences, right? But as a broad stroke kind of consequence, what are we seeing when men are not feeling valued, checked out of culture, and that's coming into things like relationships, intimacy, etc.
I mean, I think that there's just a rise in isolated men. One of the things that I talk about in the book, there's a few things I think are relevant to this. One is the plague of absent fathers. So we see, like in America, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 kids will grow up without a father figure in the household.
Mm.
And we know statistically that is net negative, not necessarily for girls, but certainly for boys. I mean, the
Yeah.
research is just undeniable that young boys without a father figure in the house really, really suffer, to the point where it's like, 90% of homeless and runaway kids are from fatherless homes. 85% of all kids who have behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. And so, I think you have a lot of men who, as a result of this checking out, are, and that comes from many different things, right? The trauma that their fathers have handed
Yeah.
down from them from World
Mm.
War II, and all this other kind of stuff. But I've talked about how this fatherless situation is really problematic, because again, young boys model their fathers, right? They
Mm.
model what it looks like to be a man based on what they see. And so if they don't have a father at home, well, guess what? Their education system is not going to have a lot of men.
Mm.
The therapeutic space doesn't have a lot of men, right? 29% of psychologists are men. And you wonder why more men aren't going to therapy or psychology. It's like, well, there's a representation problem, right?
Mm.
If you're a black man looking for a therapist and you want a black male therapist, I mean, you're just looking at such a small percentile.
Mm.
So, I think that we have a modeling problem. And I think that men are largely isolated. And, in the book, I talk about how isolation equals amplification, that when we isolate, we amplify what's going on internally. So if you're a man who was, married or in a relationship and you were deeply in love, and you kind of drifted a little bit from your male friends, and then that relationship ended, and what you were experiencing internally before the end of the relationship was anxiety or anger or frustration, or a little bit of loneliness, and then the relationship ends and you don't reconnect with your male friends, what's going to get amplified is that internal experience, that
Mm.
anxiety, that depression, that anger. So what
Mm.
do? You turn towards porn, drugs, booze, etc. So, I think that those are some of both the byproducts and contributing factors, right? This absent fatherhood
Mm.
and this isolation. I mean, the UK has a minister of loneliness, for fuck's sakes. A
Mm.
fucking minister of loneliness, because it's such a problem. And it's
Mm.
a huge problem amongst men, because we have, and this is another thing that I write about, we've bought into this notion that suppression equals strength.
Mm.
That if you as a man can just stuff your shit down hard enough and long enough, that it'll somehow reinforce or prove that you're manly, that you're masculine, that you're man
Mm.
enough. And that oftentimes contributes to your isolation, because
Mm.
you don't want other men to see that you're suffering from the breakup,
Mm.
or that your marriage is a fucking mess, or that you don't know what to
Mm.
do about one of your kids, or your business is falling apart, and you don't want to admit it because you don't want to be made fun of or feel embarrassed or whatever it is, and so you stuff that shit down and it gets
Mm.
worse.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna pause again because I just said a whole bunch of stuff. I was gonna keep pausing.
I'm enjoying the downloads because there's so much in there, and I think this certainly, that for me, that suppression equals strength, idea that we've brought into, it's as if there is going to be a medal at the end of life for the dude who did that the best, and there isn't.
Mm,
There's a fucking hole in the ground.
yeah.
And that is grim, and it is true. And somewhere along the lines, we have to be able to let go of that. But of course, I think the other thing I can often see for men is that we want to, we see a mountain in front of us and we just want to climb the mountain in one go. And we take a running leap, and you're never going to climb a mountain that way. You're going to get a little bit further
Mhm.
than one step, but you'll roll back down to the bottom. And I want to be extremely competent at that thing straight away. And if you've never, tuned into your emotionality, if your emotional literacy is a limb that never got exercised, that thing is atrophied, it's weak, and it's going to feel weak to start exercising. And that, of course, feels
Mhm.
wildly vulnerable, and we don't want to do it. And so we'll avoid it even more. Or, as to one of your points before, the idea of perhaps therapy or something for me, if I'm not seeing it, if I'm not seeing me represented or something that feels familiar and safe, I won't go towards it. And of course, if
Mhm.
literally every dude I know is running the same thing, then it
Yeah.
looks like everyone has their shit together and he is strong. And you know what? I saw that guy. He went through something tough and he just brushed it off. Like, oh, to your earlier point about modeling and in a previous conversation around I'm still being modeled. The men around me model. And so that could go any number of ways. It could be extremely beneficial, or it could continue to reinforce all of those ideas that I've bought into and continue to be fed, not just around me, but when I look at culture, right? What is the quote hero in every piece of kind of Hollywood type media these days? He's this dude who's completely unemotional. He can potentially go on and
Mhm.
kill a bunch of people and then brush it off and then go and meet his daughter. It's like, yeah, maybe, but that's probably a twisted individual too, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I think we've misinterpreted what stoicism is supposed to be.
Oh yeah,
You
stoicism
know,
gone wrong.
yeah, and so stoicism is not the absence of emotionality or
Mm,
the overpowering of your emotional intelligence with logical intelligence. It's a depth of connection to your emotional body and an understanding that that data and information, because your emotions are just another form of data and information, is equally as valid and important. And so learning to speak that language and becoming masterful in that area of your life will not only empower you, make you a better father, make you a better husband. I mean, think about what women are asking for in our modern times and culture. They want emotionally intelligent men,
mm,
right? And what's a sign that you're an emotionally intelligent man? It's the men that you surround yourself with, right?
mm,
And so and we can kind of see that, there's a bunch of work that Dr. David Buss has done, an evolutionary psychologist, about like what are women still looking for, what are their mating selection preferences, and women still say that they want their top values are a man that's kind and compassionate, but also that is able to acquire resources.
mm,
And when we hear that as men, I think that what we often hear is, oh, resources mean money. And it's
mm.
like, well, yes, that's part of it, but no, that's not the entire story. Resources also
Yeah.
mean your status socially. Resources also can mean your community, right? Having good
Mm,
men in your life is a resource that women value. You
mm,
are a much safer, much more valuable man if she's able to see that the men in your life are fucking solid.
mm,
She's going to trust
mm,
you a lot more. Resources are also time, intelligence. I mean, there's so many different forms.
mm,
So I think that we as men just need to broaden our scope, and I think that we've kind of bought into this notion of stuff it down, don't feel into it, and then just medicate the shit out of it.
mm.
We've kind of taken like the the medication route that is so popular in America. I mean, when I moved to the United States from Canada, I'll never forget how jarring it was, because in the US, pharmaceutical companies can advertise, which you
Yeah.
can't do
And New
except for
Zealand.
New Zealand. I
Yeah.
know. It's just the
Because
US
I
and New Zealand.
witnessed that. It's a whole new level in the US, though, I gotta tell you.
It's insane. It literally 3 out of 4 commercials are
Mm.
fucking medical companies, pharmaceuticals, hawking shit, that where the side effects are so much more damaging than the
Yeah, and it's
actual
that little
disease. And you're like,
at the bottom,
right.
right?
But
Just run through that.
this is the kind of mentality that we've taken. Is like, oh, when I
Mm,
feel anxious, I'll just smoke some weed. When
mm,
I'm angry, I'll just watch some porn and jerk off and feel better. And that's not what we as men do all the time, but it's a good rational solution to, I don't
mm.
like the way that I'm feeling.
Yeah. Well,
And
maybe I will go to a
and
therapy so they can give me some medication, right?
right.
Same thing.
Right. Yeah,
I want
exactly.
to bypass
And
the thing.
so and so we've lost this capacity to regulate ourselves,
Mm,
to actually slow down, breathe into the depth of our experience, be with the unsavory emotions, whether it's anger or grief or sadness or anxiousness, and to train ourselves in the art of self-regulation. And
Mm,
because, when you look at men that are really killing it in whatever field they're, whether it's they're a pro surfer or they're a famous athlete or they're a musician or, they're an entrepreneur or businessman or whatever it is, that man on some level, when he's performing, is learning how to deal with the stress in his body.
mm,
Now, you can either be a man that is learning how to deal with the stress in his body by coping and using coping mechanisms, right? Or you can be a man who learns how to deal with the stress in his life by regulating mechanisms. So things that actually allow you to be more grounded, be more centered, be more calm, be more present. And, I think I'll always advocate for the latter because
mm.
I tried I tried every coping mechanism known to fucking
All of
man,
them.
I was like, I'll just try all of these and see if, and all of them at once. And it still didn't work.
And do you
But
think part
moving
of that was this other little piece that I often hear as well in men is I also reach for those things in an attempt to feel something.
Well, yeah. So let me just talk about this. So in the book, I talk about numbness because
Mm,
most men, a lot of men that I work with, are like, "Oh, I'm so numb. I'm numb all the time. I don't know what I'm feeling." Numbness is not emptiness. Numbness is fullness,
mm,
right? Numbness is emotional, psychological fullness. So when you say you're trying to feel something, it's likely that you are just so overwhelmed and so overtaxed on the
mm,
regular that you're using weed or booze or porn or whatever it is to feel something to actually pierce through the amount of stuff that's going on inside of
mm,
you that you haven't tended to and are
mm,
terrified to actually turn towards. So numbness is not emptiness, it's fullness. And we need to change that narrative
mm.
because when a man comes to me and says, I'm numb, I say, great. There's a lot going on inside of you.
Yeah,
Let's dig it out, right? Like
yeah.
let's get our shovels. Let's start going for it.
Yeah, and if you've been stuffing something down for so long, it just makes, by the way, logical sense that you're going to get very, very full at some point, right?
Absolutely.
And you might be
Absolutely.
very good at like bursting it off, blowing the top every now and then, but that's actually more like frothing it, and that it creates more, right?
Right. It's why a lot of guys are like, oh, I'm numb and I don't talk about my emotions except for when I'm really drunk, when I've had a
Yeah,
few too many and then I'll tell my buddies, what's going on or,
yeah.
I'm the
And
classic
then
crier
maybe
when
I
I'm
have some
drunk.
shame the next day because of it, and I just tack some more in there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Just
I'll
reinforce
let this
that
bit out and I'll
hatchet.
put some shame in the morning. So
That's
then
right.
when you're speaking to that, and as you said, when we look at all the data and everything, and you just have fucking conversations with women as well, women want emotionally intelligent men. Do you think that one of the perhaps disconnects there might be that for the longest time we've kind of had these buckets that we're talking about, suppressing equals strength, and but also like women are emotional, and then we've also kind of made that potentially a bad thing, like they're emotional. Perhaps the absent word there is overly emotional, and so have we gone
Mhm.
ahead and equated being emotionally intelligent with being overly emotional? And that for us feels very foreign, and again something that is kind of shameful and weak.
Yeah. So one of the things that I say is that the way you treat women is the way you treat your own feminine nature.
Hmm.
So the majority of men look at a woman's emotions and if they're saying things like, oh, she's so emotional or she's emotional all the time, what they're really saying is, I don't like my own emotions. And so because I don't know how to deal with my own emotions, I have no fucking clue what to do with hers.
Hmm.
So it's not that she's too emotional, it's that you don't know how to deal with your own emotions.
Hmm.
Because I can tell you that the more competent I have become with my own internal emotional experience, no woman's emotions bother me. None. And it doesn't matter what emotional experience she's having because it's never too much. It's not too big. I can set boundaries with it. It can become disrespectful and I can say, that's enough. Don't talk to me like that. Don't speak to me like that or whatever the boundary is that needs to be
Hmm.
set.
Hmm.
But it's never too much and they're not crazy and they're not any of those things.
Hmm.
And so whenever I hear a man saying anything like that, I'm always like, you don't know how to deal with your own emotions. And that's just your way. And some guys aren't going to like this. And, maybe they've already tuned out
No,
by
but
now,
she's
right?
a
It's like
crazy bitch. Like
podcast.
we still
Yeah.
have those dialogues,
Right.
right?
Yeah. She's a crazy bitch and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, listen, like maybe she's a little off, right? Like that can
Yeah.
still be true. There are women who, right, are emotional
Mm,
narcissists, and there are women who use emotions or use sex in a relationship
mm,
to get what they want. And that's all true, right? It's not like men are only the bad ones, right, that commit relational atrocities. Women do crazy shit all the time too. But it's more so, what I think what we as men do is we externalize things, and we love to live a life looking out at women, trying to figure them out, trying to fix them, trying to make them our adventure, trying to get validation from them. And the key is to turn all of that around on ourselves and realize that, brother, she is not the adventure. She is not the problem to solve. She is not the journey. You are.
mm,
Your ethics as a man, your morals as a man, your integrity as a man, your decisions as a man, all of those are the journey. All of those are the adventure. And the more time you spend externalized, trying to figure her out and run through hoops, the more you miss out on who you are, and specifically who you are in that relationship.
mm,
Are
mm,
you dysregulated? Are you reactive? Do you dislike the way that you speak to her and that you deal with
mm,
her? Usually it's a cop out for a man to not have to see what he's been, tolerating in the
mm,
relationship, the boundaries that he hasn't set, the way that he's been behaving. And so it's not to say that we should just let a woman's behavior off the hook. It's that we turn towards our own behaviors, our own values, our own ethics, our own morals, and that when we do that, we then can take a stand for what we want in the relationship, and we can more clearly articulate what we will tolerate and what we won't within the context of a relationship. And we'll also have much more space and capacity to allow the women in our lives to have an emotional experience and not
mm.
judge it, and for it to
Yeah.
be okay, and for them to still feel loved and safe
Yeah. And
when
not
they're
try and
crying or
fix it and
upset or
take it
angry.
away. And
Right. And do all this shit. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I love that. Okay, so what I want to do here as we're coming to wrap up, I want to segue the shit out of all of this into a question. So bear with me and some grace. There's a question that I went to the guys. I'm in a circle and I said, I'm gonna speak with Connor, and who's got a question. And I love this question that came through. And I think it brings a lot of this together. We were speaking before about, numbness is fullness, and for so long we've suppressed emotions and we haven't really wanted to feel a lot of those things, harder emotions, let's say sadness, grief, etc. And at the same time, I might be doing things to try and feel a sense of something. I'll chase the porn or the easy woman or things to get high and feel something. And I think there can be an experience as well of struggling to even allow feelings like happiness or joy. They can feel very vulnerable. And the context for this guy was potentially something that's quite common. And he's spent a lot of his life, to kind of condense it down, creating fires so he can put out fires.
Mm.
And he's chased adrenaline and excitement through that. And so he will fuck things up, and then he is very good at putting out fires. And so, we're exploring that. And that's really what he wants to explore. And so the question that he's got is essentially, really addressing that. Now, where the hell is my thing going? All of a sudden my windows collapsed on me. There it is. And for you, someone who has obviously worked with me, but also gone through a big journey yourself of trying all the vices, what fun and excitement can look like from a mature, grounded, masculine perspective. And I suspect that, this is, let's say, asking you on a personal level. You can speak
Mm.
broadly if you want.
There's a lot of strings that I could tug at in that question. I think I'll try and narrow it down to a couple of things. Number one is that we sabotage not to be out of control, but to be in control.
Mm,
Right. So if you think about, and for most people, this is so counterintuitive that it takes a minute to sit with it, right? Because it's like, wait, no, I sabotage to be out of control. It's like, no, 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 no. Really think about when you sabotage, when you try and initiate sex with your girlfriend and she turns you down. So you go and watch porn, or, you sabotage the important meeting in the morning by staying out too late and having drinks or whatever it is.
mm,
You know unequivocally how you're going to feel. You know what you're going to do. One sec here. You know how you're going to feel, you know what you're going to do, and you have that sabotage mechanism completely mapped out. In fact, your sabotage is more known to you than the other side. So what I say to most men is, you're sabotaging because you know it. You're sabotaging because, in a fucked up kind of way, in our brains, because our brains are pattern recognition machines that prioritize safety, and safety is always baked and built on top of what we know, right? What we've seen before, what we've done before. So your brain will always prioritize a pattern in your life that is known over a pattern that is unknown, even if that pattern and that behavior is abusive, is toxic, is not what you want, is harmful, and sabotages the shit out of your life. So what we're really talking about here is a deep and ingrained fear of the unknown. A deep and ingrained fear of the unknown. I don't know what will happen if I allow myself to feel awe and wonder at the experience of not knowing how this is going to go. If I open up and be honest with the men in my life, or with my wife and tell her what I want sexually, or, in my business where I say fuck it and I close it down and I sell it and I, take the money from that business and I travel and whatever it is, whatever the deeper soul, your deeper masculine core is trying to pull you towards. So we sabotage to control. We sabotage to move us towards what we know and move us away from what we don't know. And so what do? We have to start to allow ourselves to see the awe and the wonder in the unknown. We have to allow ourselves to be grateful for the things that we have zero control over. And we have to start to humble our ego that wants to know everything, because the shadow of the masculine is this unquenching desire, this unquenchable desire to know everything. I'm gonna know how this business meeting is gonna go. I'm gonna know how she's gonna react when I say X, Y, and Z. It wants to know everything. And so you have to begin to work against that primary urge to want to know everything and start to say, okay, I have no idea how this is going to go. And let's see how it works out. And then to start to pull yourself into the forest of the unknown actively, consciously, and to expand your capacity in any given moment to say, I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm going to let it go and just see. And I'm going to prioritize grounding myself in the face of the unknown. Most men, because we are so distracted and we are so domesticated and we are so medicated and tuned out, we don't know how to regulate ourselves in the face of the unknown, because it's fucking terrifying for most of us. It's easier for a man to say, well, I know exactly how this is going to go, than it is for him to say, I have no idea how this is going to go, but what I do know is that I can handle myself regardless of what happens. What most men are really saying when they sabotage is, I don't trust myself to be okay if shit goes south. So I'm going to make it go south first.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I can, again, there's that, that knowing and that sense of, like trust if I've taken care of what the outcome is, right? And I love that piece, all of that, and really coming back to that piece of self-trust. I don't know what's going to happen. Let's see, and I can handle it, and you can, and you can become more competent at handling the unknown and building that self-trust, right?
Yeah. So I think, just to give some tactical stuff, I would say write down the very specific cycle of your sabotage. Write it out, right? It's like, I do this and then I choose that and then this happens and then that happens. And then I wake up the next day and I feel this way and I think these thoughts. Write the whole thing out in as much detail as you possibly can, so that you know the cycle. And then choose some interjection points, some active, specific interjection points. So, like, I'll give you an example. There were years where I watched way too much porn and I couldn't stop watching it. I had a really hard time letting it go. because it was like an addiction for me. You know, it was my favorite distraction. I convinced myself that it was low impact, yada, yada, yada. When I decided to let it go, I wrote out the entire cycle of what would normally happen when I was using it, what the routine looked like, because every man has a fucking porn ritual. After working with tens of thousands of dudes, I'm like, most dudes have a porn ritual. They watch porn in the same place, yada, yada, yada. And I wrote it down and I created some interjection points. One of them was, as soon as I felt the urge to watch pornography, I would force myself to set a timer and sit down and breathe and feel into what I was experiencing and ask myself a very simple question of, what am I actually feeling right now? Am I actually horny? And the majority of the times, eight or nine times out of 10, I was bored or I was lonely or I was something else, you know? And then I had very specific things that I could go and do instead, right? Instead of watching the porn. I could go out for a walk. I could do some yoga. I could call a buddy. I could read this book. I could, you know, work on something. I had many things that would reground me and prioritize that regulation that we were talking about before. So write out the cycle, create some interjection points, but really start to get in the habit of asking yourself, can I influence this or can I not? And see if you can expand your capacity to be with the unknown, to be with the things that you can influence. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love it. Addressing the deeper pieces and some practical strategy.
You bet. That's
Love
you
me.
gotta have the tactical
You got to
and
have
the
it.
strategic, you know, tactical and practical, baby. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. And I think what a beautiful way to sum up what I think is probably a really big piece of men's work at the end of the day, right? Like, it can't just be chasing all the strategy. Guess what? You can watch every fucking billionaire's morning routine and it ain't going to do shit. Right? It ain't going to do
Yeah, unless
shit.
you do it.
Yeah. And unless you explore like you. Yeah, I love it. So Connor, thank you for that. I know you've written a phenomenal book, and I can't wait for the immediate impact and the longer term impact, because I absolutely hear that and believe that as well. And I know that there's a lot in there. So I'm going to ask you a difficult question. For you, what is one message that you hope men take away from the book? One of a bunch, if you like.
One of a bunch. Yeah, that's good. Stop apologizing for being a man. Just stop. Stop fucking apologizing. Don't apologize for being a man of any race or ethnicity or religious background or spiritual choice or whatever it is. Just stop apologizing and move towards the healing that your life as a man is asking you to explore. So that's number one. And I'll just follow it up with, you know, the first line of the book is, a man's work begins in pain. And so, you know, what I really hope that every man has taken from this conversation is that our pain as men is either going to be the block and the barrier to the life that we want, or it will be the doorway that we can walk through to the life that we know we are capable of building and creating. So, but it's your choice. You have to walk through it. And so I would just say that is that if you can learn systematically, slowly, you know, through other models and example, to turn towards your own pain as a man and learn how to carry it and learn how to be with it and learn how to accept it, and maybe even eventually possibly learn how to love some of it, you will have done something so seismically radical for the world and for the people around you that it will shock you. And you won't know it until hindsight. You probably won't know it until 5 or 10 or 20 years down the road, but you'll wake up one day and you'll be like, holy fuck, I did something so meaningful. And that is what I think a legacy is.
Beautiful. Therefore, get the book.
And there's lots of exercises. Every chapter has exercises, questions, very specific things for you to do and implement.
Connor, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing, you know, some of your examples and your expertise, and more so pouring your energy and yourself into this book and getting it out there in the world. Personally, I'm very pumped, and I am very much looking forward to getting my hands on one, because I haven't yet, but also being able to your point, get this in the hands of other men. Like, I want to be able to hand this and give this to others and say, I know this guy, he's my friend, and this is an amazing piece of work. Sit with it, learn from it, and implement it. So Connor, thank you so much.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.